Now, I have a book on James, and it's on this chapter, chapter 3, that we've come to, and it has a sensational title. Now, I don't go in for sensationalism, but my sensationalism is just as large as it is in the Bible, and my title is a Bible title. For chapter 3, I have entitled it, Hell on Fire. And that is the expression we're going to see that's used in this particular chapter here to talk about the tongue. Now, we've heard a great deal in our day about freedom of speech and freedom of the press. That's sort of a sacred cow right now, this idea of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Freedom of the press means that they can brainwash you according to the liberal viewpoint. And freedom of speech means that you can use vile language. I'd like for somebody to get freedom of the ears. I only have one mouth, and I got 2 ears, and I think that my ears ought to be protected as well as my mouth also. And therefore, we need freedom of the ears today as well, freedom of speech. But this, by the way, is freedom of speech in God's university. That is one way that I have labeled this particular chapter here. And I could also put another label on it. God bugs your conversation. Now, there's been a great question about whether you got a right to bug. Well, God has had that right for a long time, and He's heard everything that you say. It's estimated that the average person says about 30,000 words every day. I know 2 or 3 that I think say a few more than that, and that's enough to make a good-sized book. And these folks that I know, they could write a whole series of books on what they say in one day. But you and I in a lifetime could fill up a library with what we say. God has that recorded, by the way, because He bugs your conversation. Now, this present freedom of speech movement, I suppose, began out here on the West Coast at the Berkeley campus, and it was given coverage by all the news media out of all proportion to its importance because it was another attempt at brainwashing. And a great many taxpayers and prominent citizens here in California were evidently concerned that a great university, which their tax money supports, can be shut down and made a ridiculous spectacle by a few, at that time, they were called beatniks, hippies, and punks, for that is exactly what they were. While in that university, the majority of the students were intimidated, the serious students, and it reflected upon their good intentions to get an education. Well, there was a change of administration. It's better now, but may I say the scars still remain. Now, that problem is not only out yonder in the university and in the news media today, it's in the church. And the problem there is the problem of gossip. Each one of us who's a Christian, and that applies to you and it applies to me, and that concerns freedom of speech. Now, James here, and as I've indicated, he's like the book of Proverbs, and he has a university. And James is the dean of God's university as we consider this controversial subject. And Dean James has quite a bit to say concerning this matter of the use and abuse of the tongue. And I like to think that we go into the laboratory and that we are now going to make another experiment. You see, we're in a section where God is testing our faith, and He tests our faith in many different ways. We'll mention that when we finish this because this will be the last chapter. Now, God tests our faith by our tongue, and so we want to reach upon the shelf and take down an acid. And actually, this acid is more potent than hydrochloric or sulfuric or any other acid that man has concocted. And the label on the bottle here is tongue. And we're not talking about the chemistry of the tongue, but the theology of the tongue. And he's already indicated he was going to come to this. He said way back in verse 26 of chapter 1, if any man among you seem to be religious and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. And then you remember he said something about to be quick to hear and slow to speak, because you've got 2 ears. Now, God gave them to you so you could hear probably twice as much as you could say, because he only gave you 2 mouths. I mean, 1 mouth. Some have 2, but most normal people have just 1 mouth. Some are double-tongued, you see. They say one thing on one side of it and something else on the other side of it. Now, let's come to this tremendous subject, because actually the tongue is the most dangerous weapon in the world. It's more deadly than the atom bomb, and there's actually no inspection of the tongue. Some wag made the statement that it was a miracle in Balaam's day for an ass to speak, and today it's a miracle when they keep quiet. Or somebody's put it like this: it takes a baby 2 years to learn to talk and 50 years to learn to keep his mouth shut. There's a man fishing down here on one of the piers here in Southern California, and 2 women walked out. He was out there alone, and he had been fishing for several hours, hadn't caught anything. Finally pulled up a fish. It wasn't a very large one, and these 2 women took upon themselves to rebuke this man. They said, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself, so cruelly catching this poor little fish?" And the man, without even looking up, because he was a little discouraged anyway, he says, "Maybe you're right, lady, but if the fish had kept his mouth shut, he wouldn't have been caught." And someone else put it like this: if your lips would keep from slips, 5 things to observe with care: to whom you speak, of whom you speak, and how, and when, and where. And it has been translated in many different ways, and practically every nation has had something to say about this. I want to take this from Spurgeon Salt Cellars. It's one of his publications, and pass this on to you. The boneless tongue, so small and weak, can crush and kill, declared the Greek. The tongue destroys a greater horde, the Turk asserts, than does the sword. The Persian proverb wisely saith, a lengthy tongue in early death, or sometimes takes this form instead: don't let your tongue cut off your head. The tongue can speak a word whose speed, say the Chinese, outstrips the steed. While Arab sages this impart, the tongue's great storehouse is the heart. From Hebrew wit the maxim sprung, though feet should slip, ne'er let the tongue. The sacred writer crowns the whole, who keeps the tongue doth keep his soul. Now, all of these are very wise and very wonderful, by the way. And I believe today, frankly, that the most dangerous thing in the world, as we've said, is the tongue. I think the church is more harmed by the termites within than the woodpeckers on the outside. And someone has put it like this: thou art master of the unspoken word, but the spoken word is master of you. If you've once said it, friends, it's too bad. And I found, being on radio, you sure have to be very careful today, because you can be misunderstood. And